Welcome to Heads Up on NDTV Profit. As always, every morning, this is where we kickstart your business day with a look at all the top stories coming in from the global markets. Also, what is happening in Japan and Libya. We'll wrap out all of that for you. Here are the top stories in the headlines first. US stocks hold their three-day winning streak and slide on weak earnings outlook and geopolitical concerns. Consumer spending in US rose more than forecast in the month of Feb. Fatal levels of radiation were detected outside the Fukushima Daiichi plant in Japan, signaling a partial fuel meltdown. And the Parliamentary Accounts Committee wants Ratan Tata, Anil Ambani, Sanjay Chandra, among others, to appear before it in the 2G scam probe. First, the Asian markets, and you'll see that most of Asia is trading with a negative bias this morning, with the Nikkei down 1.5% in trade right now. The Kospi is managing to hold on in the positive territory, but the rest of the Asian markets are trading with a little bit of negative bias to themselves. KLSE Taiwan managing to hold on to just about partial gains right now. Chinese markets, they hope, haven't opened up for trade right now, but we'll check in on them once they do. Yesterday, they closed marginally in the negative territory. Chinese inflation will probably rise more than 5% in the year to March, pushing the central bank to raise interest rates. The combination of a low base effect, high global commodity prices, and also rising service costs, it might push inflation towards three-year highs in the coming months. Now, China, remember, has raised rates 3 times since October last year, when it began its current monetary tightening cycle. And analysts are expecting a further 2 or 3 rate increases in the first half of the next year itself. But moving on to US stocks, what happened on Wall Street? US stocks have halted their 3-day winning streak and slid after a late session reversal. Stocks fell on earnings and on geopolitical concerns. Trading volume was the lowest that was seen in 2011 so far. Stocks spent most of the day in the positive territory, with the S&P 500 hitting a session high near the 1,320 mark, and that for the second straight session, driven by the strength seen in telecommunications sector and also in consumer spending data, which came also yesterday, and it showed a little bit of growth there. But at close, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has lost 22 points. That's roughly 0.2% to close at 12,192. And the S&P 500 index, that fell similar 1/4% cut there. The Nasdaq Composite fell 0.5% to 2,730. On the Nasdaq, about 3 stocks fell for every 2 that rose. In terms of volumes, only 6 billion shares were traded on the NYSE and the Nasdaq. That's the lowest volume seen in 2011. Now, US consumer spending rose slightly more than forecast in February, while inflation accelerated to its fastest pace since June 2011. We got a chance to speak to a couple of analysts. Let me flag off Dr. Harem Bartholz. He spoke to us last evening. He's chief US economist with UniCredit Research. His take on the employment picture and on consumer spending.
If you look at January and February combined, we saw already that consumer spending in real terms only rose much slower than it did in the previous quarter. We therefore revised down our GDP estimate for the current quarter. But we continue to expect that a gradually improving labor market, plus the tax deal agreed by President Obama and Republicans in Congress, will continue to support consumer spending throughout this year.
Let's get a little bit of analyst perspective going and a little bit of expert opinion. We have on the phone line from Indiana Mr. Scott Noble joining us. Mr. Noble is Managing Director with Samix Capital. Thanks very much, sir, for joining in. This is Bianca, as always. Good morning here from the entire NDTV Profit team. 2 key points that stand out from yesterday's trade on Wall Street: low volumes, and then you have earnings outlook. We'll come to that in a little bit, but what do such low volumes indicate? Just investors' uncertainty?
Well, good morning, Bianca, and to your viewers as well. Yeah, low volume is a concern because volume is really the fuel to any move in the market. For example, the market's down and are falling on low volume, you're just running out of sellers the same way on the upside.
Economic data so far, Scott, has sort of taken a backseat to geopolitical events, but do you think one of the triggers, possible drivers, in fact, could be the U.S. government's March payrolls report, which is due on Friday?
Very much so. Any trigger right now could move the market up or down. One of the things that worries me is listening to your earlier analyst, who was somewhat bearish on the GDP number. I mean, even Goldman Sachs is warning that their GDP estimate is going to have to be downgraded tremendously.
Sure. All right, Scott, we're going to have to wrap up this conversation, but thanks very much for joining in and giving us your views. Always good to speak to you on NDTV Profit. We're going to take a short break right now. On the other side of the break, we'll talk about the Indian markets, stocks that we should be watching out for, the triggers that the Wall Street is likely to latch on to today. All of that coming up after this short break. Stay with us.
Heads Up with Profit, brought to you by Indian Overseas Bank. Good people to grow with.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying on with Heads Up on NDTV Profit. Quick check on the Hang Seng and the other Asian markets will show you a picture that is not looking very good this morning. Hang Seng has just opened up for trade. It's down marginally 0.09%, 23,047. That's the figure. Chinese markets, as expected, they have also opened up in the negative territory. 0.3% losses for both the Chinese indices. The Shanghai Shenzhen trending down 0.3% and the Shanghai Composite also down right now 0.3% in trade. Rest of the Asian markets, the smaller ones like the Kospi and the Taiwan, the KLSE, these are the only ones which are managing to hold on to some amount of gains, but the Nikkei average is right now trending down and lower, further lower, 1.5% cut on the Japanese markets. But moving back to India and to the 2G scam probe, the latest there, the Parliamentary Committee Accounts Committee, which is looking into losses caused to the government because of its license allocation policy, now wants top industry leaders whose companies got these licenses to appear before it. Ratan Tata, Anil Ambani, Sanjay Chandra of Unitech, among others, these are the people who are expected to appear before the Public Accounts Committee. It has also summoned lobbyist Neera Radia. Arijit Banerjee is standing by with all the details on this developing story. Arijit, what line of questioning is the PSC likely to take when it comes to these corporates?
The questions definitely will, of course, focus on crucial issues. Of course, the issue of the methodology of getting the license, the issue of why they entered the telecom license. People like Ratan Tata and Anil Ambani will also be questioned on the whole issue of dual technology, and there would be certain clarifications sought from most of these people. Back to you.
Arijit, thanks very much for the details. And there's new twist in the CBI's investigation of Swan Telecom, which is co-promoted by the DB Group. Swan Telecom won a 2G telecom license in 2008, and it's being investigated by the CBI for its role in the scam. Now, Ashok Wadhwa, who's the CEO of Ambit, who was also questioned for his links with Swan, Wadhwa has signed an undertaking denying that he was a director in Swan Telecom. He says that his signatures have been forged on the minutes of board meetings at Tiger Traders. That's a co-promoter of Swan Telecom. My colleague Mayur Shekhar Jha has got all the details on this story. Mayur, what else are you picking up?
Interestingly, in fact, this is an interesting twist to the entire probe, and we understand from sources that, in fact, Ashok Wadhwa has been denying any linkage with Swan. Ashok Wadhwa to turn an approver in the matter.
So accusations and counter-accusations, we'll keep a track of this developing story, the 2G scam probe. This perhaps is being billed as the final. Before the final, everyone wants a piece of the on-field action that promises to be a thriller. But the question that thousands of ordinary cricket fans are asking, just where have all the tickets disappeared?
You can click your way into a seat for the World Cup final at Wankhede Stadium this Saturday. With just 4,000 tickets open to the public, the black market is already doing big business. In Mumbai with Anurag Dwari, Prachi Wagh for NDTV.
And I heard someone saying that even the tree branches just outside the Wankhede Stadium, that's being sold out. Well, I'm going to wrap up this edition of Heads Up on NDTV Profit. Do stay with the channel. There's lots more coming up.